what we're going to be talking about is OSINT, which is open source intelligence and how to verify it. Now, a lot of what we're going to talk about is quite basic here today, but it's amazing tools that you can use to effectively get through most of the disinformation. Because we live in this amazing age where Russia crosses the border and we have 40,000 images of Russian soldiers within just hours. But with all that new great information came so much disinformation. So the aim here today is to give you a bunch of tools you can walk away with, you can use, give to your mum, your dad, your uncle, and you know the uncle that you would give it to teach them to just in 5 minutes debunk 90% of the misinformation out there. So what we're going to be doing is if you're on WebEx, there'll be lots of exercises you can do, as well as QR codes that anyone in the room can scan using their phone and play along with a few exercises that we have today. So what are we up against and how do we solve it? Now, this photo is quite a famous photo, the original is somewhere in the building here, of the 1948 election with Truman holding a newspaper that he lost to Dewey, even though that Dewey actually won the election. The editor of the Chicago Tribune, a guy named Joe Maloney, was a very, very famous editor, very renowned, decades-long career, ruined by one bad call. He didn't verify his source, and he went to print with the wrong president winning the 1948 election. And it has this photo. His entire career has been made by this photo, and it just, for all the people in this room who are looking at getting into analysis or journalism, one non-verification can give you decades of your career. So, the good news is that 90% of this false information can be knocked out in 5 minutes. The disinformation people usually aren't that smart. Hopefully Vlad's listening. So, my part I'm going to be taking you through is verifying images. So, this is an image I came across in my Instagram feed, and you can take a look at it. It's apparently of a COVID protest in 2020 in Paris, with some of the worst grammar I've ever seen in my life. So, they're all in really similar color outfits, and that was the first thing that set my spider sense tingling. So let's go and do exactly what I did, step by step. I downloaded the image, I cropped it, and then I put it into Google reverse image search. Now again, it sounds basic, but when was the last time you actually did it as a person? Actually took some information and debunked it right there on the spot. We want to give you tools to give to other people to help them fight misinformation as well. Now when I reverse image searched it, I came up with this, which actually looks like a pretty similar image. So when I came and put it in, I found a Express article, and I won't make my comments on the Express. And we come with this image, which actually looks really similar to the one we had before, which was a COVID protest. And when I check it against it, yeah, that's a pretty similar image. I'm pretty comfortable with that. Where is the image actually from? Well, it's actually from Paris. It is from Paris, 2018, and a World Cup celebration. Now, either they are the best analysts and best forecasters in the world, and they picked COVID 2 years early, or this is misinformation. So, but let's double confirm. Again, I don't want to be that guy who gets Dewey wins the election. So I'm going to look for similar images of the same event. And we have the Paris celebrations here, and yep, it's the same as looking buildings, same setup, same location, and the sky and the weather are roughly the same as well, which is really good for double confirmation. I also can go get a 3D render of the area, and see if the buildings and the setting will match up. And everything does. So I feel pretty comfortable as an OSINT analyst now going, yep, this was probably taken at this spot on this day with lots of supplementary evidence. Now, there are more advanced tools. So OSINT tools like EXIF Viewer Pro, and we'll put all of this on the tweet later on in the comments so you can download them all yourself, but allows you to look at the EXIF data of a photo. This is the GPS coordinates, what phone it was taken on. So if you have 30 photos taken with an Android, one with an iPhone, that's probably the one that's suspicious. And you can download that straight from the Google Chrome store. Next one is Google Advanced Search, which does sound really basic again, but I pumped in defense spending for Australia. I'm going to pick on Australia here for a second. And nothing came up. But I pump in with that into Google with file type PDF, and the first result is exactly the document I was looking for, which just helps you find that needle in the haystack. Google Earth, which sounds really basic, but this is all stuff you can download today really easily and get going. And what it allows me to do is double verify information. So for instance, Modi's landed in Ladakh. Let's double check if that airstrip they say it is correct. So I can pull up a 3D model of the hills behind him and match it with a photo. And does it match, does it not? Really useful stuff. SunCalc allows you to use a bit of trigonometry and a bit of math to work out the exact time a photo was taken, which is really useful if you're trying to work out troop movements and whatnot. And Sentinel Hub, Google Earth is a fantastic website, but Sentinel Hub does satellite photos every couple of days usually. So if you're trying to work out when a village was burned down, you can go, yes, 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 no, and now you have a 2-day window of when that village was burnt down. And there's where you can download it. So I'm a big believer in exercises, so I'm going to do one called 2 Truths and a Lie. And here's the first QR code, so feel free to pull out your phone and scan that. Now, the 3 statements I'm going to make about this photo are that this is a Russian-made tank, that this photo was taken in Georgia, and it was taken in 2023. So, to go through the exact steps that we did last time, download the image, crop if you need it, upload it to Google Images, check the results of the image, and check the source. So what you're looking for here is any articles where it's been mentioned, where it first popped up, because that'll actually tell you much more about the photo than just this random photo. Because I can say this is from Ukraine, but let's actually double check it. So you're looking for where that article first pops up. Now there's also a bit of a hint. It's the little camera icon there on Google Images that you want to be pumping it into. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to go, or a couple of seconds just to go through that. But generally, what you can see here is how easy this is to do. And that's what we really want. I can give amazing technologies on what we can do and verify and satellites and whatnot, but the average person doesn't have access to that. So we want to give you tools that you can not only give to other people, but you can use really quickly yourself. And again, it debunks about 90% of it. I'm shocked at the amount of disinformation out there that is just one quick Google away from being complete nonsense. So, what have we learned about this tank? So, that's covered up, but that's fine. So, it is a Russian, and the answer was, yes, it is a Russian-made tank. Yes, it was taken in Georgia, but no, it was not year 2023, it was taken from the 2008 invasion, which is just a nice reminder that this is not new behavior for the Russians. So, I'm going to hand over to my fantastic colleague Andrew, who's going to take you through how to verify a source, because it's probably the next most important thing.
Thank you. So at the apex of legacy media, unlike the apex of legacy media, where there are far more gatekeepers for the spread of information around the world, today information can come from anywhere. And this is especially true on platforms like Instagram and Twitter, where a source could be a distinguished professor, a profile picture you just recognize, or a completely anonymous account. And to make matters worse, these platforms encourage us to reshare information before actually engaging with it, which contributes to this mess of information and misinformation that we have online. So it's very critical that we all have some heuristics or a tool belt that we can use to sniff out bad information when we're online. So let's go through a few. 1, and this is very simple, but we don't do it often. Check the source's previous work. Are they a beat reporter on this topic? Is their past work of similar quality? These are things that can raise a red flag very quickly. 2, look at their social media. Are their personal accounts posting things that are suspicious or scammy, or that would raise a red flag as well? 3, are they backed by an institution that you can use as a proxy for their credibility, such as a think tank or NATO? 4, does anybody that you trust follow them or can vouch for them? And then 5, who's talking about their work? Is their work being cited in peer-reviewed research or referenced in reputable articles? These are all super simple steps we can take. We don't do it often, but you'd be surprised how many sources don't actually pass these tests. And just quickly also, none of these items on the list alone are going to be able to tell you if a source is safe, but in the aggregate, they should be able to provide you with a defensible level of comfort when you're vetting a source. Now, another way that you can vet a source is to check a source's reporting on a story that you know very well. So, if somebody were to come up to me with a compelling narrative that due to the rise of BRICS, they think the dollar is going to die within the next year or two, but I just recently looked at analysis of the US dollar as a percentage of total global currency reserves, then I would know that my source is either omitting some very critical information or just misreporting information altogether. So, back to our exercises, and this one's not for now, but tonight when you get home, I would suggest that all of you pick a story, find a few sources that are covering that story, and then read their respective analyses to build a perspective on their credibility. Try and look out for tone, bias, and verify the sources that they're using some of the steps that we talked about earlier. And then finally, score each of those sources based on your own personal weightings and priorities. See which of the three that you find most credible. And as a bit of extra credit, try ranking those sources before you carry out the activity. What this will do is it'll give you a set of preliminary rankings and final rankings that you can compare at the end. Now, if your preliminary rankings and final rankings line up pretty closely, then that means that you're probably well calibrated to this current media environment. But if they're far off, then you might want to pay a bit closer attention to the information that you're consuming online. And now I'm going to pass it off to my colleague John to take a step back and not just talk about sources, but the stories that they're reporting.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So what Michael and Andrew have talked about before is kind of investigating the things within a story. How can you kind of check what's going on within a story? We're going to zoom out now and kind of take it as a whole. How can you be sure that a narrative or a story that's been written is credible, or get pretty close to understanding that? We're going to use a tool that we call the 6-foot versus 10,000 foot story. And 6 foot is the personal level. You're seeing it from a 6-foot person versus a 10,000 foot story, which is, a plane in the sky, kind of getting more context. Take a look at the quick differences and kind of give you some ideas about which might be more credible. So the 6-foot story, as I said, super easy to understand. It's on the ground. Think a war journalist, think a reporter in an economic summit, kind of listening to speeches as they're going on. The idea is that it's real time and it's from a person, witnessing events in real time. Some of the pros of that kind of reporting: first-hand accounts. We know what's happening, or if we trust that source, we know what they're saying is true. It's up to date. This stuff can be instantaneously sent back to headquarters or published or put up online. And it often provides evidence. You can take videos, you can have conversations and record them, you can snap photos and WhatsApp them to your friends. It's really instantaneous, but it's also evidence. It's not just someone's word. On the con side, however, you've got a limited perspective, right? If you're on the ground watching something right in front of you, you by definition don't know what's happening 100 feet away, a mile away, 10 miles away in another country. So you're only seeing something that's right in front of you. Often the people who are writing these kinds of stories and reports, take for example that image there, a journalist, he might not be an expert in military hardware, so he doesn't know what to look for and he doesn't know if he's missing out key details. They're often not experts in what they're seeing. And there's obviously a really heightened risk of bias. It's just inevitable. It doesn't mean they're nefarious actors or anything, but if you're on the ground reporting on things, it's almost impossible not to have some emotional attachment, particularly when it comes to war reporting. But really, it's a good rule of thumb for all in-person reporting. So let's move to the 10,000 foot story. Again, super self-explanatory. This is the expert analyst report. The DoD briefing there is a really good example of what we're talking about. Again, that 10,000 foot view from the sky that kind of contextualizes what we're seeing. Go through the pros again. So this time you can get in-depth knowledge because you can pull in experts from outside. You can say, I'm hearing this information, what do you think? You have a long career in this. You can really kind of drill down and know what you're talking about. These kinds of stories and reports are often more objective, more analytical. They're not on the ground, so they're not emotional, but they're also able to kind of sit back and say, well, my experience lets me kind of see this without kind of getting wrapped up in the story. And you can compare across data sets. If you're hearing something from on the ground in Ukraine right now, you can compare it to another report that you got from a neighboring province or something like that, or a data set that you have, and you can kind of cross-check and become more credible in that way. But there are cons. Time lag. I used to work in a government, and I know all too well that these reports take days, weeks, and probably realistically months to come out after events transpire. So often events pass by these kinds of reports, or at the very least you're not getting the most up-to-date data, and you need to understand that when you're reading reports like this, it may not reflect the current situation. And obviously these things can miss small details. For those of you who've been following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you'll remember at the very start of the invasion, these kinds of 10,000 foot reports and stories were focusing on how many tanks, how many vehicles, how many troops were massed on the border. What they didn't get right was the quality of those vehicles, the tire pressure, these kinds of details that maybe the 6 foot kind of story might have reported on, but these 10,000 foot stories often missed. And that kind of information really did skew, maybe not the credibility, but the accuracy of those kinds of reports. So which is better? I think you can probably guess that I'm going to say both. The gold standard here is to be using as much of this kind of stuff as possible, but being aware of what the differences between the stories are. So we're going to do another quick exercise. If you want, you can get out your phones again and do a QR scanning exercise. We've got two stories here. I'm not going to tell you where they're from, but they both cover North Korea's launch of a solid-state fuel ICBM earlier this year. Same event, very different stories, and I want you basically just to go through and come up with an idea of which story you think is more credible, gives a better analysis. And remember, just for a little bit of cheat sheeting here, what we've talked about already, putting back Michael and Andrew's points as well, we're looking for like multiple credible sources within the story. What I've just talked about, the idea of different kinds of sources, not just all sources, but are they giving me different perspectives, different contexts? Neutral tones. We don't want emotional language. We don't want lots of adjectives. We want facts. We want things that say this happened, this happened, this happened. Visual evidence, as Michael talked about, links to previous work, as Andrew talked about, and it's always great if you can get supplementary evidence from experts that aren't necessarily involved in that issue. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. You don't actually need to read the stories. We like to say that people go, oh, I trust my gut, but really when you trust your gut, what you're doing is you're relying on many, many years of intuition that you've built up through doing these kinds of exercises. There's no such thing as being born knowing the truth. You have to develop this stuff till it becomes instinctual. And looking for these kinds of things is precisely how you do it. Okay, so we'll cut to the chase here, and I will tell you that the story on the left as I'm looking at it, the Al Jazeera story was the one that we think is more credible. And I didn't tell you before it, but the other story is by North Korean state media. Right. If I told you that, you would have jumped immediately to disregarding it, right? And fair enough. But what happens if I put up the exact same text, but changed the title and you didn't know it was from the North Korean state media? You need to be able to go through these exercises and understand why the North Korean state media is so uncredible, non-credible. And we chose the Al Jazeera story. Again, I've gone through this, but it used multiple sources. It had people on the ground. It had analysts at the 10,000-foot level, pretty balanced language, linked to some of its previous work on it, which gives it more credibility, visual evidence, supplementary evidence. I think they spoke to a seismologist about kind of seismic tremors in the region. And so you can really kind of be comfortable, not 100% comfortable, but you can be more comfortable that that story is more credible than the North Korean state media. I'm going to pass it over to Andrew just to wrap up again.
Thank you. So as Mike mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, our goal today was just to provide you with some concrete steps you can take to sniff out bad information online and verify your sources. So let's just do a quick recap. 1, use the tools that Mike mentioned at the beginning of the presentation to verify your images and videos. I know it's exciting to share things on Twitter, but it's even cooler to share accurate information. 2, examine the source's previous work to establish credibility. I like to say, don't just consume journalism, but try and be a bit of a journalist yourself. 3, check the source's work against a story you know well. This is a very easy sniff test, and anybody that has a field of expertise can use this tool very easily. Be mindful of the 6-foot versus 10,000-foot view. Understand the pros and cons of each that John mentioned and find a balance. Start off as a neutral consumer of information and make sources tick boxes of credibility to earn your trust. You can now verify sources, images, videos, so you can raise your bar for good information. And then finally, in this line of work with OSINT, there's always going to be some level of uncertainty, but by using some of these steps, you can lower those levels quite a bit.
So that's us for today. I'm Michael Hilliard. This is Andrew Eaddy, and this is John Fowler. It has been absolutely amazing to be speaking with you today, and there's one thing I want you to take away from this. It is that this generation, this group of people in the room, are the people to regain the general public's trust with information that comes out. If we had everyone doing this, if we had people actually checking sources and knocking out most of this disinformation, we wouldn't have the amount of fake news, we wouldn't have the amount of disinformation and the lies and campaigns we see at the moment. If this was the simplest possible weapon we can give you because it's the most usable and the one that's most easily accessible. So if you take anything from this, is that verifying 5 minutes work, will debunk 90% of problems. And that's a huge weapon for us to do. So it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you guys today. Huge thanks to the AV team as well, the unsung heroes of these things. And I will hand back to our fantastic host. If you want any of the information, it'll be on that Twitter thread from the first exercise. Otherwise, it'll be in the pamphlet. So thank you so much.
Thank you, gentlemen.